Sarah had been embedded on a classified mission inside the same military base as Mark, operating under strict secrecy while enduring a full month of calculated humiliation. In front of others, he mocked her rank, her silence, her presence, each insult delivered with a smirk meant to remind her who he thought held power. She never reacted, not when laughter followed, not when eyes turned away. But that night, inside the barracks, surrounded by metal bunks and witnesses who pretended not to see, Sarah finally spoke back. Her voice was controlled, low, precise. The room froze. Mark's jaw tightened, his pride pierced. He stepped forward and hissed, "You made a fatal mistake, young lady," before shoving her violently off the chair. The impact echoed louder than the insult. Sarah didn't cry out. She rose slowly, knuckles white, breath measured, eyes empty, not broken, but recalculating. That push ended her silence and sealed his fate. From that moment on, Sarah stopped surviving and started planning. She didn't seek revenge with fists or rage, but with patience sharpened into a weapon. Every regulation he violated, every order he twisted, every shadowed corner where he thought no one was watching, she documented, mapped, waited. Mark believed he had crushed her in front of everyone. What he never realized was that he had just given her justification, motive, and timing. And what followed would dismantle him piece by piece, far beyond what humiliation ever could. But before we proceed, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now let's understand how this story really began. The mess hall at Coronado Naval Amphibious Base pulsed with noise and heat. Stainless steel trays slammed against long metal tables, boots scraped the deck. Conversations overlapped in sharp bursts, inside jokes, crude laughter, complaints about drills and command. The air smelled of disinfectant, burnt coffee, and overcooked protein. Rank hung invisibly over every movement, dictating who spoke loudly and who kept their eyes down. In the far corner, partially obscured by a structural column and a stack of cleaning supplies, Sarah sat alone. She occupied as little space as possible. Shoulders slightly forward, spine straight but relaxed. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers still, nails trimmed short to regulation. The three-seaman uniform hung loosely on her frame, fabric faded from repeated, industrial washing. No patches of distinction, no insignia that invited conversation. For 30 days, she had existed on the margins, scrubbing deck plates until the skin on her knuckles cracked, hauling refuse bags that leaked sour liquid onto her boots, serving chow behind the counter, eyes forward, voice neutral, memorizing faces that never bothered to memorize hers. She moved when ordered, she stopped when told. She listened more than anyone noticed. No one asked her name, no one needed to. Except Lieutenant Mark. Mark sat at the center table, legs spread, elbows wide, claiming territory by posture alone. 50 years old, thick neck bulging above his collar. A faint twitch lived under his left eye, flaring when he laughed too hard or drank too much caffeine. His uniform was immaculate, pressed within an inch of inspection tolerance, ribbons aligned with obsessive care. Authority radiated from him not because he earned it daily, but because it had never been challenged. He scanned the room the way a predator surveys familiar ground. His gaze landed on Sarah. A slow grin pulled at one corner of his mouth. He lifted his boot slightly and ground the heel into the deck, smearing a dark streak of grime across the polished surface. "Hey, janitor," he called out, voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. Conversation stalled. A few heads turned. Mark extended his arm and pointed, finger rigid, command disguised as mockery. "You missed a spot," he said. "Get down here and clean it properly." Laughter detonated around the table, loud, unrestrained, performative. Men slapped the metal surface, chairs screeched backward, someone whistled. It was the sound of group immunity, of power shared by proximity. Sarah did not react. Her eyes remained forward for a full second longer than expected. Then she rose from her seat in one controlled motion. No rush, no hesitation. The chair legs whispered against the deck as she stood. When she turned, her gaze met Mark's directly. There was no anger in her expression, no embarrassment. Her breathing was steady, measured through her nose. A faint tightening appeared at the corner of her jaw, not tension, but restraint. "Discipline," she said, her voice low and even, carrying without effort, "is not cruelty, Lieutenant, it's control. And you lack both." The mess hall died. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Someone swallowed audibly. The ventilation system hummed, suddenly intrusive in the silence. Mark's smile collapsed. The tick beneath his eye flared violently. Once, twice. He stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed to the deck. "You made a fatal mistake, lady," he said, each word clipped, breath sharp through flared nostrils. He closed the distance into strides. His hand struck her shoulder with full force, a shove driven by weight and rage rather than technique. Sarah's body absorbed the impact. She collided with the edge of a table, ribs catching hard, then went down. The deck knocked the air from her lungs in a short, silent burst. A tray clattered. Someone cursed it under their breath. No one moved to help. She lay still for a beat. Then, from the floor, Sarah smiled. It was small, controlled. Her eyes were clear. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. She rolled to one knee, rose without assistance, and brushed invisible dust from her sleeve. Her fingers straightened the collar of her uniform with precise care. She did not look at Mark again. She walked out of the mess hall, boots striking the deck in an unhurried rhythm. Behind her, Mark stood breathing hard, chest rising and falling, convinced the moment had ended in his favor. He had no idea he had just destroyed himself. 20 minutes later, Sarah passed through the last controlled access point and descended into the sublevels beneath the base. The air changed with each flight of stairs, cooler, drier, stripped of salt and sunlight. Fluorescent lighting replaced daylight, humming faintly above concrete walls reinforced with steel lattice and blast-rated doors. Cameras tracked her movement, lenses adjusting silently as she crossed invisible thresholds. 3 levels underground, she entered a secure communications room that officially did not exist. The door sealed behind her with a hydraulic sigh. The space was narrow, functional, designed for endurance rather than comfort. Racks of encrypted comms equipment lined one wall. A spectrum analyzer glowed softly on another. There were no windows, no clocks. Time was measured here in data packets and signal logs. Sarah exhaled slowly through her nose. Her hands shook as she removed her cover cap and set it down with deliberate precision. The tremor ran through her fingers, fine and controlled, the kind that came after a chemical surge burned itself out. Not fear, not doubt, residual adrenaline, still echoing from the impact on the deck above. She sat, rolled her shoulders once to release the stiffness along her spine, and opened a hardened laptop pulled from a locked drawer. The casing bore no markings, no serial numbers visible. She powered it on and waited as layered security protocols initialized biometric scan, pulse recognition through the trackpad, retinal confirmation via the DIM sensor embedded in the frame. When prompted, she entered a clearance code from memory. Not written, not stored, memorized under oath. The screen resolved into a black field. Then text appeared. Department of Defense, Inspector General Oversight, Pentagon, NCIS Joint Authority. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the glass eyes, steady, jaw set, the faint discoloration already forming along her ribs beneath the uniform. She acknowledged the login without expression. She was not enlisted. She had never been. Her authority did not come from rank, but from statute, federal mandate, and direct oversight authorization signed in Washington. Civilian Oversight Authority, embedded asset, silent auditor. Her presence existed to test systems precisely where they believed themselves immune. Her cover had been approved at the highest levels. Only the Admiral knew who she really was. For 30 days, she had lived as background noise. She reached for a set of headphones and slipped them on, adjusting the fit until the seal was tight. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical familiarity. File trees opened. Timestamps scrolled, audio logs populated the screen. For a month, she had listened. Miniaturized passive listening devices planted in office dens, vehicle cabins, unsecured junction boxes. RFID intercepts pulled from cargo manifests. Duplicate shipping records cross-referenced against authorized movement orders. Behavioral logs tagged with time, location, and witnesses. Patterns emerged when patience was applied. She selected an audio file flagged in red. Mark's voice filled her ears, confident, casual, lowered just enough to suggest secrecy without discipline. The cadence of a man who believed consequence was something that happened to others. Crates already cleared, no inspection on this end, he said. Dear wants confirmation before transfer. Tell him it's genuine issue, not surplus. Sarah's lips pressed together, barely perceptible. Another file, another date, routed through the secondary depot. Paperwork'll lag by 48 hours. That window's enough. The supply chain wasn't leaking, it was being siphoned. Mark wasn't just abusive, he was a thief. She paused the playback and removed the headphones. The room felt smaller now, the weight of accumulated evidence pressing in. She opened a manifest file and overlaid it with logistics data. Highlighted discrepancies pulsed on the screen, equipment diverted, serial numbers altered, signatures duplicated. Her signature was not there, but his was. She could report him now. The system would respond. Investigations would trigger, lawyers would descend. Damage would be contained. Quietly, she closed the laptop instead. Justice worked better when it was undeniable. Sarah stood, replaced her cap, and squared her shoulders. Her breathing slow, settling into a steady operational rhythm. Somewhere above her, routines continued uninterrupted. Soon, they wouldn't. At 0500, the grinder was already alive. Floodlights cast hard white cones across the concrete parade ground, flattening shadows and stripping color from everything they touched. The Pacific air carried a damp chill that clung to exposed skin and crept beneath collars. Boots aligned along painted lines with mechanical precision. Rifles were slung, checked, rechecked. Breath steamed briefly, then vanished. The unit stood in formation. Lieutenant Mark occupied the front without effort, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders loose, chin slightly raised. He rolled his neck once, slow and casual, as if loosening up before a routine workout. The faint tick beneath his left eye flicker and disappear. He expected to command. The expectation lived in the way his weight rested comfortably on his heels, in the confidence that no variable existed today that he did not control. He glanced down the ranks, measuring compliance. Then the sound of approaching footsteps cut through the stillness, deliberate, unhurried. Admiral Vance stepped onto the grinder. The reaction was immediate and instinctive. Spine straightened, hands tightened against slings. A collective inhalation rippled through the formation and locked in place. Vance's presence altered the atmosphere, the way a pressure change alters altitude, subtle, undeniable. Mark's posture adjusted half a degree too late. Vance stopped several paces in front of him. His uniform was immaculate, ribbons dense with decades of service. His face was unreadable, eyes sharp and pale. Scanning without appearing to move. Change of plans, the Admiral said. His voice was calm, controlled, amplified only by authority. No microphone was necessary. Washington has sent an external oversight authority to observe today's live-fire exercise. A murmur threatened at the edges of the formation and died before it could form. Mark's mouth pulled into a thin smile. He exhaled through his nose, a sound just short of a laugh. Some desk civilian, he said, tilting his head slightly, as if indulging in inconvenience. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then Vance turned his gaze fully on him. The temperature seemed to drop. You will follow every order, the Admiral said, each word measured, deliberate, or you will answer to me. Mark swallowed. The muscles along his jaw tightened, then released. He nodded once, sharp and contained, masking irritation behind discipline. His hands clenched briefly behind his back before forcing themselves open. An engine growled in the distance. A Humvee rolled onto the edge of the grinder, tires crunching against gravel as it came to a controlled stop. The vehicle was unmarked, matte green, utilitarian. No flags, no identifiers, the engine cut. Silence returned, thicker than before. The passenger door opened. Sarah stepped out. The transformation was immediate and unmistakable. No janitor uniform, no mop, no faded fabric or ill-fitting insignia. She wore clean tactical gear plate carrier properly seated, comms cable rooted with professional economy, boots broken in but well maintained. Her posture was neutral, balanced over the midfoot, hands relaxed at her sides. She moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to observation from hostile angles. There was no rank on her chest, none was needed. She paused for half a second after clearing the vehicle, eyes sweeping the formation, not searching, not judging, simply cataloging. Her breathing was slow, controlled. A faint bruise colored the skin just visible at the edge of her collar, already darkening, already irrelevant. Mark stared, The blood drained from his face in stages. His lips parted slightly, then pressed together. The tick beneath his eye returned, sharp and persistent. His chest rose too quickly, then slowed as he forced air back into his lungs. Recognition hit not as panic, but as inevitability. Sarah met his gaze. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no anger. Only calm focus, the kind that preceded execution of a plan already set in motion. She turned her attention back to Admiral Vance and nodded once. The assignment was no longer theoretical, it had arrived. The kill house loomed squat and colorless against the early light, its concrete walls scarred by years of controlled violence. Inside, the air smelled of cordite residue and coal dust. The interior lights snapped on in segmented rows, casting sharp angles across narrow corridors, door frames, and blind corners engineered to punish complacency. Mark stood at the threshold, adjusting his gloves with unnecessary force. His jaw worked side to side once, then stilled. The tick beneath his left eye fluttered as he scanned the structure, mapping it the way he always did by habit, not humility. He took point without asking. No one challenged him. Sarah followed 2 steps behind, silent. Her gaze tracked everything Mark did not. The way his shoulders angled too far forward, the micropause before each threshold, the fraction of a second his eyes dropped to the floor, and they should have stayed level. Her breathing matched the cadence of the team, slow and controlled, weapon held in low ready without tension. They moved, boots whispered against concrete. Muzzles cleared corners, the first room passed cleanly. Mark's confidence swelled with each meter gained, posture loosening, movements growing faster, sloppier. He cut angles aggressively, shivving time, trusting momentum. Halfway through the second corridor, Sarah spoke. Once, "Lieutenant," she said, her voice calm, precise, cutting through the comms channel without urgency. "You're drifting left, you're exposing your team." Mark did not answer. His lips tightened, his grip adjusted imperceptibly, fingers whitening against the frame of his weapon. He leaned harder into his next movement, correcting nothing, asserting control through denial. He breached the next doorway, dissimulated round-hit center mass. The vest registered the impact with a sharp electronic tone. A red indicator flared on his chest. Dead. The team froze by reflex. Mark stood still, eyes wide for a fraction of a second, breath caught high in his chest. Then the realization landed. His shoulders sagged just enough to be visible. "You failed," Sarah said evenly. She stepped past him without touching him, her movement economical, respectful, devastating in its indifference. "You looked down instead of around." Mark's mouth opened as if to speak. No sound came out. They reset. Again, he took point. This time he overcorrected, sweeping his muzzle to eye, hesitating at corners, second-guessing every movement. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the cool air. His breathing grew audible in his mask, sharp inhales betraying the effort to regain control. Another simulated round caught him from a blind angle. "Dead." Sarah's eyes flicked to the sensor, then back to Mark, no comment. They reset again, and again, each run stripped something away. His shortcuts vanished, replaced by hesitation. His authority eroded with every public failure, every electronic tone announcing another mistake. The men behind him stopped watching the corners and started watching him. Sarah said little. When she did, it was surgical. A word, a correction, of truth delivered without volume. By extraction, Mark's movements were mechanical, stripped of confidence. His hands trembled as he cleared his weapon. The tick beneath his eye pulsed uncontrollably now. He avoided looking at the team, staring instead at the stained concrete floor. The men who had laughed with him the day before said nothing. They didn't need to. The kill house doors closed behind them, sealing the lesson inside. Mark walked out smaller than he had entered. Lunch hour fractured the base into predictable currents. The mess hall refilled, louder than the morning, the earlier tension diluted by routine. Outside, movement followed habit rather than orders. Mark used that window. He peeled away from the flow without announcement, tray abandoned half-finished, steps angled toward the service corridor, and led away from cameras and casual oversight. His shoulders were tight beneath his blouse. The tick beneath his eye pulsed, then stilled as he forced his expression into something neutral. He checked his surroundings twice before turning down a narrow access path between storage buildings. His pace slowed, not cautious enough to draw attention, not fast enough to suggest urgency. Sarah watched from above. She stood on an elevated maintenance walkway, one level up, partially obscured by conduit piping and shadow. Her posture was loose, almost inattentive, one forearm resting lightly against the railing. To anyone below, she was just another body in tactical gear, eyes scanning the horizon. Her gaze never left Mark. She noted the way his left hand stayed close to his pocket, the shallow breathing, the way his jaw clenched before he stopped near the loading bay door. Mark turned his back to the open yard and pulled a small device from his pocket, no screen glow. No identifying marks, disposable. He brought it close to his mouth, shoulders hunched inward as if trying to fold himself smaller. "The deal's still on," he whispered. The words were barely audible from where Sarah stood, but she didn't need to hear them directly. Her earpiece transmitted the signal cleanly, stripped of ambient noise. Mark's voice carried the cadence of reassurance layered over strain. "Delay this morning was nothing. Inventory clears by end of day." A pause. He listened. His fingers tightened around the phone, knuckles blanching. Yes, same drop, same crate. He exhaled, long and shallow, relief leaking out despite his effort to contain it. He ended the call and stood still for a moment, eyes closed, forehead resting briefly against the metal door. When he straightened, his expression hardened again, mask back in place. He never looked up. He didn't know the crate had been swapped. The original container unremarkable. Regulation. Invisible. A design had been removed 12 hours earlier under authorized override. In its place sat an identical unit, weight matched, seal intact, manifest duplicated down to the last digit. Inside, nested beneath phone and serialized components, were GPS trackers hardened against signal jamming and a chemical dye pack engineered to rupture on exposure to air. No solvent, no countermeasure, permanent. Sarah's fingers brushed the control on her earpiece. "The rabbit is moving," she said quietly. Her voice carried no anticipation, no satisfaction, just confirmation. She watched Mark walk back toward the flow of personnel, shoulders squared, confidence reconstructed from denial and habit. He merged into the crowd, indistinguishable again, unaware that every step he took was now mapped, logged, and time-stamped. Sarah remained where she was until he disappeared from view. Then she turned and walked the opposite direction, already adjusting timelines in her head. The chain was tightening, not rushed, not forced, inevitable. The docks lay at the edge of the base like a scar, functional, exposed, and unforgiving. Sodium lights cast a jaundiced glow across stacked containers and wet concrete, reflecting off pooled seawater and oil residue. The tide rolled in slow and indifferent beyond the pylons, its rhythm steady against the tension tightening in the air. Mark walked beside the crate, not touching it, not looking directly at it. His hands stayed visible, palms loose, posture carefully neutral. The tick beneath his left eye pulsed again, harder now, as if trying to escape the discipline he was forcing onto his face. Each step was measured. He checked his watch once, then stopped himself from doing it again. The crate sat where it was supposed to, unremarkable, sealed, stamped with regulation codes that had passed through a dozen systems without resistance. Two dock workers stood nearby, backs turned, unaware of the weight of what they were standing next to. Mark nodded once. The locking mechanism disengaged with a metallic snap, the lid lifted. Blue smoke erupted upward in a violent plume, thick and luminous, swallowing the immediate space in seconds. It clung to Mark's uniform, seeped into fabric seams, stained skin and gear with unmistakable color. He staggered back instinctively, breath catching as the chemical marker bloomed across his chest and arms. Before he could speak, floodlights ignited. White light slammed down from every angle, erasing shadow, pinning movement. The dock transformed instantly from routine logistics space into a containment zone. Vehicles roared to life at the perimeter. Boots hit concrete in disciplined cadence. Federal agents. The command cut through the smoke. Amplify. Final. Mark froze. His hands rose slowly. Fingers spread. Palms forward. The movement was automatic, drilled into muscle memory, but the delay before it happened betrayed him. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted once, twice, searching for an exit that no longer existed. The blue dye soaked through his sleeves, down his collar. Undeniable. Proof layered on proof, visible even from a distance. His breathing grew shallow, chest rising too fast beneath the stained fabric. The tick beneath his eye spasmed uncontrollably now, a small, involuntary betrayal of the control he had always relied on. Footsteps approached through the smoke, measured, unhurried. Sarah stepped forward. She wore dressed whites. The uniform was immaculate, pressed, precise, every line exact. No excess, no decoration beyond what was required. The contrast between the ceremonial clarity of her appearance and the chaos around her was stark, intentional. She stopped just short of him, posture straight, hands at her sides. Pentagon credentials rested against her chest, clearly visible. The seal caught the floodlight and reflected it back, sharp and unmistakable. Mark stared at them. Recognition drained what little color remained in his face. His jaw trembled once before locking shut. His raised hands began to shake, fine tremors rippling through his fingers as the reality settled into place. Sarah met his eyes. There was no accusation in her expression, no triumph. Only a calm, professional finality, the look of someone watching a process reach its conclusion exactly as designed. Around them, agents moved in with controlled efficiency, securing the area, cataloging evidence, documenting every angle. The blue smoke thinned, but the stain remained. Mark stood motionless at the center of it all, exposed, illuminated, and silent. The setup was complete. Mark sat alone at the metal table, wrists secured in front of him by steel cuffs that bit into his skin with every involuntary movement. The blue dye had dried unevenly across his uniform, staining the fabric in jagged patterns that looked almost like bruises. It marked his hands, his neck, the edge of his jaw. No amount of scrubbing would remove it. The chemical had done exactly what it was designed to do, make denial impossible. The room was windowless, concrete walls. A single overhead light that hummed faintly, casting a tight circle of illumination that left the corners in shadow. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold metal. A camera lens stared down from the corner, unblinking. Mark's breathing came shallow and irregular. His shoulders twitched each time he inhaled, as if his body expected impact. The tick beneath his left eye pulsed constantly now, no longer subtle, no longer contained. His fingers curled then, uncured against the cuffs, testing the restraint without realizing it. The door opened. Sarah stepped inside and closed it behind her. The latch clicked softly. Final. She did not sit immediately. She remained standing for a moment, eyes on Mark, posture composed, hands relaxed at her sides. The dressed whites were gone, replaced by a neutral jacket, credentials still clipped and visible. Her presence filled the room without effort. Mark looked up at her and then away again, jaw tightening. A bead of sweat traced a line down his temple, cutting through the dry dye. "You pushed the wrong person," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, level, devoid of threat. The words landed anyway. She took a seat across from him and placed a thin folder on the table. The sound it made against the metal surface was precise, deliberate. She opened it and slid the first photograph forward. Mark's eyes dropped despite himself. A soldier lay on a stretcher, leg twisted, at an unnatural angle, uniform shredded. Medical tubing ran from his arm. His face was pale, jaw clenched against pain captured mid-moment. The next image followed before Mark could look away. Another soldier, shrapnel burns across exposed skin. A tourniquet cinched high and tight, soaked dark. The next photograph showed a rifle laid out on an armorer's bench, fractured at the receiver, internal components warped and misaligned. Sarah watched Mark's hands curl into fists, the metal cuffs creaking softly under the pressure. She slid the final page across the table, a manifest. His signature sat at the bottom, clean and unmistakable. "You sold their safety," she said quietly. The room seemed to contract around the words. Mark's lips parted. His breath hedged, stalled halfway in, then rushed out in a sharp exhale. His shoulders slumped forward, as if something structural inside him had given way. The tick beneath his eye spasmed violently, then stopped altogether. "I didn't." His voice cracked on the first syllable. He swallowed hard, throat working. "It was just equipment," he said. The justification sounding thin even to him. No one was supposed to get hurt. Sarah didn't interrupt. Silence stretched. The overhead light buzzed. Mark's breathing grew erratic, chest rising too fast now, hands shaking opally. His gaze drifted back to the photographs, to the injuries, to the evidence arranged with clinical care. His fists loosened, His head dropped forward until his chin nearly touched his chest. "I didn't think it would come back to me," he whispered. The admission escaped him without ceremony, without drama. Just truth, finally unguarded. Mark broke. His shoulders trembled once, then again, a quiet collapse contained entirely within the small, unforgiving space of the room. Sarah remained still, eyes steady, allowing the moment to exist without commentary. Justice did not need volume, it only needed light. The base assembled under a sky washed pale by coastal haze. Personnel lined the parade ground in rigid formation, rows extending farther than usual, bodies pulled from every operational sector. Dress uniforms dominated the field-pressed fabric, aligned ribbons, polished boots, reflecting the muted light. Conversations were absent, even habitual murmurs failed to form. The silence carried weight. Mark stood alone at the center. His hands were clasped in front of him, fingers interlaced too tightly, knuckles pale. The blue staining had faded from vivid to dull, but it still clung to the seams of his uniform, a ghost of exposure that no laundering could fully erase. His shoulders were squared by reflex, posture drilled into muscle memory, but it no longer carried authority. The tick beneath his left eye twitched once, then stopped, as if even it had exhausted itself. An officer stepped forward and read the findings aloud. The words were clinical: dates, violations, breaches of federal statute. Each line landed with measured force, stripping context, leaving only fact. Mark's jaw clenched, a muscle jumped in his cheek. He stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, absorbing the dismantling of a career syllable by syllable. The insignia was removed. Hands detached the symbols of rank with precise, impersonal movements. Fabric shifted, metal clicked softly, each sound cut sharper than the last. When it was done, Mark stood unchanged in appearance to an untrained eye, yet fundamentally altered. The absence was louder than any accusation. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, as if still hoping discipline might save him. It didn't. Sarah stepped forward. She wore no rank, no decoration beyond her credentials. Her posture was composed, balanced, her presence calm without softness. She stopped several paces in front of the formation, eyes moving across faces young, old, hardened, uncertain. She saw the calculations forming behind their expressions, the quiet reassessment of power. "Rank is not protection," she said. Her voice carried without strain, even, deliberate, "it is responsibility." The words settled across the formation, not like a reprimand, but like a correction long overdue. No one looked away. A few jaws tightened. Someone swallowed hard. The meaning reached places doctrine never touched. Mark lowered his gaze. Applause began slowly. Not loud, not celebratory, it spread in restrained cadence, hands striking gloves and fabric with controlled force. The sound was steady, measured, devoid of triumph. This was not satisfaction. It was justice acknowledged. Sarah held her position until the sound faded on its own. Then she nodded once, a minimal gesture, and stepped back. The formation remained at attention. The base had witnessed something irreversible. The parade ground emptied in disciplined silence, formations dissolving into controlled streams of movement. Boots struck concrete in measured cadence, faces stayed forward. What had been witnessed was not discussed aloud. It settled instead into posture, into memory, into the quiet recalibration that followed consequence. Sarah remained where she was. She stood near the edge of the grinder, hands loosely clasped behind her back, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the perimeter fence where the ocean line blurred into haze. The breeze tugged lightly at the edge of her jacket. Her breathing was slow, even, the controlled rhythm of someone who had finished one operation and was already preparing for the next. Footsteps approached from behind. They were hesitant. Too light to belong to command staff. Too deliberate to be accidental. Sarah didn't turn. A young private stopped several paces away. His uniform was immaculate but stiff with newness, creases still sharp, boots polished with care that bordered on anxiety. He swallowed once before speaking, his hands clenched briefly at his sides, then forced themselves still. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, respectful. Sarah turned then, just enough to bring him into her peripheral vision. Her expression didn't change, but her attention sharpened. She waited. The private hesitated. His jaw tightened, a fine tremor visible along the muscle. He glanced once toward the administration buildings, then back to her. His breathing caught for half a second before he pushed through it. "A colonel signed the transfers," he said. The words landed softly, precisely. Sarah's eyes flicked to his face, cataloging microsignals, the whitened pupils, the tension riding high in his shoulders, the way his weight shifted unconsciously from heel to toe as if bracing for impact. He wasn't speculating, he was reporting. "Which colonel?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, neutral. It invited truth without pressure. The private shook his head once, small and tight. "I don't know the name," he said. "But the authorization came from above Lieutenant Mark. I saw the routing co." It wasn't his clearance. Sarah held his gaze. She nodded once. "That will be all," she said. The private exhaled, relief leaking through discipline. He snapped a clean salute, held it a fraction longer than required, then turned and walked away, shoulders still rigid, steps too precise. Fear hadn't left him, purpose had joined it. Sarah watched him disappear into the flow of personnel, her jaw set, subtle and firm. The case files she had built scrolled through her mind, automatically routing anomalies, approvals that shouldn't exist, signatures that didn't belong in the chain. Mark had been careless, someone else had been careful. She reached up and adjusted her earpiece, fingers steady. The war wasn't over. It was bigger. Washington's response arrived without ceremony, encrypted, brief, precise. A promotion was authorized. Expanded authority, broader jurisdiction. A transfer back east, closer to the spine of power where decisions were made and names carried insulation. It was framed as recognition, as trust, as reward. Sarah read the message once. She didn't sit down. The office was quiet, late afternoon light slanting through reinforced glass, catching dust motes suspended in the air. Outside, the base continued its rhythm, vehicles moving on schedule, voices carried faintly across concrete, a machine that never truly stopped. She closed the file. Her fingers rested on the edge of the desk for a moment, nails trimmed short, hands steady. Beneath the calm, calculation moved with practice speed. She replayed faces, patterns, the way silence had fallen during the assembly, the way eyes had tracked rank instead of conduct for years. She typed her response herself. "These people need watching, no flourish. No justification beyond the truth." The reply went out through secure channels, time-stamped and logged. Somewhere far away, someone would read it, pause, and understand exactly what it meant. Sarah stayed. Not as a ghost buried in systems and shadows, not as an invisible auditor slipping between cracks. Her presence became known not loudly, not theatrically, but undeniably. Processes adjusted, conversations shortened. Paperwork grew cleaner, people checked themselves before speaking, before signing, before cutting corners that had once felt safe. She walked the base without escort. Personnel noticed her without staring. They straightened unconsciously when she passed. Some felt relief, others discomfort. Both reactions were instructive. She observed without interference, cataloging micro-behaviors the way she always had: the delayed salute, the avoided eye contact, the hand that hesitated over a signature. At night, when the base quieted and lights dimmed to operational minimums, she reviewed reports and updated files. Not hunting, watching, waiting. Justice didn't always require immediate action. Sometimes it required presence. She stood on the perimeter one evening, ocean air cool against her face, the sound of waves steady beyond the fence. Her reflection stared back faintly from the glass, older than the uniform she had worn as cover, harder than the rank she had never needed. She was no longer invisible. She was accountable to no chain that could be compromised. Not a ghost, a guardian, because some mistakes deserved witnesses. And some systems only changed when someone stayed to see them change. If you want more stories like this, quiet strength, real consequences, and justice without spectacle, subscribe to the channel and stay with us.